Cancel culture, speaking truth to power or mob intimidation? That's next on Keep It Social. What's up, y'all? I'm Paris, and this is Keep It Social. Cancel culture. What is it? Holding public figures accountable or a form of bullying and intimidation? Many celebrities have faced cancellation. The latest is J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter book series. She came under fire for tweeting an article with a caption that was perceived as offensive by the transgender community. She later doubled down on those tweets and issued a 3,600-word essay explaining herself. But fans of the series, as well as various members of the Harry Potter cast, including Daniel Radcliffe, were quick to condemn her actions and distance themselves from the author. So to talk more about this, I'm joined by my darling co-host, Terrence. What's up, Terrence? How you doing?
I'm well. How are you today, Paris?
I'm hanging in there. And Terrence, we are joined today by Abby Ohlheiser, who's a senior editor covering internet culture with MIT Technology Review. She joins us from DC. Hi, Abby. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being with us. And we're also joined by Asia Romano, who's a culture reporter at Vox in New York. How are you, Asia?
Great. Happy to be here.
Thanks for being with us. So, Asia, let's start with you. Was J.K. Rowling canceled?
That's a big question. J.K. Rowling, of course, is a huge author. She is beloved by millions and millions of Harry Potter fans. And currently she has 15 million Twitter followers, so it takes a lot to cancel someone of that stature, but this is a lot that we're talking about. We're talking about a very, very influential children's author making very, very transphobic tweets and a very, very long transphobic, very defensive essay, doubling down on those tweets that already comes after months of ignoring criticism and sort of heartbroken pleas from fans to listen and show empathy for trans people and for their own experiences and so forth. And I think all of that culminates in what feels like a very, very heavy cultural rejection of her, and I think this gets into the question of what do we mean when we say someone is canceled. I think a lot of people want to assume that it means you want to cancel someone's career, you want to cancel their presence in society, you want to basically ostracize them. I think of it I kind of think of it as like that Black Mirror episode, the Christmas episode where John Hamm gets like blacklisted from the universe, so people can block him from their vision. I think that's what a lot of people think cancel culture is supposed to be, but I tend to think of it more as a consumerist reaction to someone that you have essentially decided doesn't deserve to be on your cultural radar anymore. So you essentially say you're going to stop consuming their work. You're essentially going to boycott them. And if that happens at a collective scale, then we're talking about possibly from here on out, Rowling's work just doesn't get that much cultural attention. She'll still continue to have a following. She'll still continue to have fans, but her work will be, I think, just retroactively as well as moving forward, will be considered in a much different light than we did before.
I mean, that's interesting because you say that we're not going to be able to talk about Rowling without mentioning this, right? And so for me, I wonder, so I'm going to tell you where I've kind of arrived on cancel culture, and then we can litigate that all day long. So for me, I guess I want to say, yes, it's productive to just block these people out and silence them and not talk about them, not talk about anything they're doing. But in so many ways, I feel like that prevents us from really offering constructive criticism and contextualizing what they're saying and using that for historic context. I almost kind of, an example of this came up for me this week with some of the, there's this huge debate over monuments right now, over controversial monuments to people like Christopher Columbus, Robert E. Lee, et cetera. And so one monument in Boston was beheaded, the Christopher Columbus statue. And someone by the name of Ariel Gray, a journalist in Boston, had written, she felt like the statue should stay as beheaded to help us contextualize the history and help us understand why these things are problematic. In so many ways, I feel that way about cancel culture. I feel like that helps us to continue to hold these people accountable and not forget what they have done that was bad, right? But I don't know. You feel free to disagree.
I feel like one of the tricky things about talking about cancel culture is that it is a term that means so many different things to so many different people and can be manipulated easily because of that, right? So in, say, more conservative media, often cancel culture is talked about as this unstoppable force of like progressive mob activity that is out to ruin the lives of, you know, particularly like white conservative Americans, right? But it means something entirely different when you get into more progressive circles where this is actually happening and there's more of a nuance to it, where what you're talking about is accountability work in a lot of ways, right? Where, you know, with Rowling is a really good example where I think when you're looking at the Rowling kind of cancellation that happened, it's important to remember that she has a lot of queer, particularly trans and non-binary fans. It is a prominent part of the fandom. And so some of this is her fandom holding her accountable for things she has said that are hurtful or traumatizing to them, right? So it's, on the one hand, you have this conversation about real hurt and people who are using the internet to hold powerful people accountable for the consequences of what they say. And then, yes, on the other hand, you have kind of the behaviors of mob activity on the internet, which can get out of hand and can strip nuance. But I think it's very important to pay attention to what we prioritize. And are we prioritizing kind of these questions about the ways in which cancel culture might be not perfect over trauma? Right, for instance. And so it's so tricky because all of these things are valid to discuss, but we always risk kind of paying attention to one thing too much and shifting the conversation away from things that are impacting real people.
I think it's important too to understand that cancel culture originated as a concept in Black social media within the Black community, and the Black community, as they essentially coined this idea, were using it. The best I can explain it is like, you can think of it as like an extension of the boycotts that happened in the civil rights movement. You know, like it's not, it was never about punishment, individual punishment. It was about a collective action to say, both as individuals and as a community, we recognize that we don't have much agency over your cultural platform, but the power that we do have, as one person that I talked to told me, was the power that we do have is to ignore you, you know. And in that context, it was about a reclamation of agency. And I think in Harry Potter, it's a really like almost for me, it's even hard to see it as cancel culture because like I myself am like, I've been in the Harry Potter fandom, very, very deeply involved in the Harry Potter fandom, and was for at least a decade more, really almost the entire time. So, so like since 1999, basically 21 years. And that is a long time to be a Harry Potter fan, especially a queer.
I appreciate it.
Well, I'm also a queer non-binary Harry Potter fan. Mm-hmm. So for me, this is like, it's not only personal, it's not only like, it's a feeling of collective mourning. Like I still talk every day to people that I met in the Harry Potter fandom in the year 2001, you know? So these are like, it feels very small. It feels more like, it's much less like we are going to like start a social movement against this very far removed creator, you know? And it's more like we have to come together as a community to figure out how to mourn this, you know, to figure out how to grieve. And that may sound like it may sound far-fetched, but like Harry Potter is so personal to so many people. Like this basically was like a secular Bible for millions of fans who basically like gained from these books like a roadmap on how to show empathy and tolerance and how to stand up for and protect the weak and the vulnerable and the marginalized, because the whole books are about, you know, magicians trying to figure out how to safely protect muggles who don't have magic and are therefore vulnerable, and are explicitly vulnerable to white supremacists and the type of context that we're seeing play out in the real world every day right now, right? So in the middle of that context, to have the author of these books double down on literally like the most vulnerable, marginalized community that there is. Like you can't find a more, like arguably like Black trans women are the most attacked, most vulnerable, most trans women just experience appalling rates of violence directed at them because of transphobia. And when you think about the author of these wonderful series of books who taught literally like multiple generations, millions of people how to be human, and being the arbiter of this type of like really transphobic discourse, it becomes like, it's really hard to separate your own personal feelings from that, both as a fan and as a member of that community, and to separate how culturally important that is, you know? So when we talk about cancel culture, like this is sort of a whole different scale from what I think we're normally seeing, where you have like an individual doing an individual action that then you can either require accountability for, and then they show atonement or they don't, and we go from there, right?
Mm-hmm.
But but this is just like so much bigger than that.
Yeah, absolutely. So what about you, Terrence? I mean, what's the place of cancel culture given everything that's been said?
I think that to Aja's point earlier, it's kind of to her point about this collective mourning, right? It's up to the afflicted group, in my opinion, to kind of dictate what cancellation looks like, right? Like if you're not a part of the group that feels attacked by whatever public figure, right, then I don't think you necessarily have the license to say what is or isn't cancel culture. And I also, beyond that, like a step forward for me, when I think about cancel culture, I am thinking about, okay, you did this, it affected this many people, it was a huge, misstep, whatever. But the follow-up is atonement, right? Like, how are you coming back to say, either apologize, do some kind of work to show that you understand how this has impacted others. You understand why they have chosen to basically, as Aja said, I think it was Aja who said, you're no longer in my cultural sphere, so to speak. And then how you can improve or somewhat repair what you said, right? Because I think a lot of times when people hear cancel culture, they think, oh, I'm canceled. I'm no longer a part of, the world's ethos, so to speak. And that's not necessarily true for me. I don't think any individual person is their worst moment. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I don't think any individual person is their worst moment. And I think because of, this era of wokeness and polarization that people kind of forget, that we aren't our worst moments. And I think that all people deserve to have time to atone and, repair. And I think if they choose not to, then, that's a separate conversation, but I think they still deserve that moment to do that work.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's a great point, Terrence. Well, Abby and Aja, thank you both so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time and your insights.
Thanks for having us.
Sure. Thank you. Anytime.
Well, that's it for us. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to all our social channels and let us know what you'd like to see on the show. We'll see you next time. And until then, Terrence, what should they do?
Paris, they're our friends. They have to keep it social.